There's going to be a bailout.
Well, they had to. Right? I mean, paper markets would have
They
collapsed.
knew.
Cash would have stopped coming out of ATMs. They had to backstop this.
They knew the taxpayers would bail them out. They weren't being stupid. They just didn't care.
Yeah, because they're fucking crooks. But at least we're going to see some of them go to jail. Right? I mean, they're going to have to break up the banks. I mean, the party's over.
I don't know.
You know, Lauren, the word justice, they spell it wrong. It's Justus. Just us.
I don't know what to do about the depression, the inflation, and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
It's hard to comprehend the overall global carnage caused by the 2008 financial crisis, a crisis created by the toxic, incestuous relationship between governments and bankers, fostered over decades. What's even more hard to comprehend is the complete lack of justice for the outright systemic fraud of a banking system whose greed and risk-taking in 2008 threw Main Street under the bus and into perpetual crisis. Whilst nations have been left drowning in unsustainable debt following the bank bailouts of the 2008 crisis, bankers went straight back to doing what they do best, defrauding the taxpayers that saved them, paying themselves record bonuses, and using the crisis as an excuse to take even more control of the global financial system. We now live in a world where the rule of law ceases to be, replaced instead with a two-tiered justice system where politicians and bankers operate with near criminal immunity, where criminal prosecutions are replaced with slap-on-the-wrist fines, and outright fraud is childishly described by the mainstream media as bad behaviour. People of this world have been failed by their governments and politicians, failed by central bankers, failed by the regulators, failed by rating agencies, failed by judiciary systems, failed by the majority of the mainstream media, whose need for access and advertising revenue and softball questioning never gets to the root of the world's major monetary problems, and most of all, failed by the legacy global banking system, who have continually abused the trust placed in them. But where all of these entities failed, Bitcoin is going to succeed. Bitcoin is justice the world has been searching for following the 2008 financial crisis. However, the truth is that whilst 2008 was a seminal event, it's just the tip of the iceberg. As Bill Steele states, for decades international bankers and the financial elite, using coercion of the state, have created a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This insidious war of attrition between the financial elite and Main Street has culminated in a handful of bankers playing God, deciding who wins and loses, destroying our currencies and economies, and using fraud as a business model.
Wall Street is fraud, America is fraud, the world is fraud, banks are fraud, central banks are fraud. We live in an era of fraud. It's all based on fraud, and they get a percentage of the fraud. That's the business model. To suggest that there is any moral or ethical aspect to anything that's going on now is to be completely naive about the fact that we live in an era dominated by financial terrorists, jihadi.
Unfortunately for the bankers, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. The monetary revolution is here. In a world absent of justice for the actions of the financial and political elite, it has fallen on Bitcoin to hold them accountable. Bitcoin has become real-time justice and restitution. Allow me to explain. How do we know justice was not served in 2008? Because justice is based on proportional restitution. Restitution that should be enough to sufficiently deter future instances of the immorality that was carried out. In this case, global systemic bank fraud. During the crisis, we witnessed systemic subprime mortgage fraud, libel manipulation that affected 800 trillion in underlying assets, improper and illegal foreclosure practices, fraudulent selling of CDO and retail mortgage-backed securities by major banks.
Do you think they know that you think something is a piece of crap when you sell it to them and then bet against it? You think they know that?
On top of this, there was hidden fees in mortgage refinancing transactions, as well as many other money laundering practices that happened around this time. But instead of proportional restitution, including criminal prosecutions for some of the biggest financial frauds and crimes ever seen, we got an absolute global whitewashing.
Banks took the money the American people gave them and they used it to pay themselves huge bonuses and lobby the Congress to kill big reform. And then they blamed immigrants and poor people. And this time, even teachers. And when all was said and done, only one single banker went to jail.
To add insult to injury, huge bonuses were paid out of the bailout money, and criminal prosecutions were instead replaced with cash settlements, which did not even directly affect the bankers responsible for the crisis.
From that point forward, they didn't take anybody to court, and all of these cases involving all of these banks, they went the settlement route instead. They let off all of these people who had done very, very bad things, and so we have this legacy of cash instead of punishment.
In addition to this, settlements, also known as slap-on-the-wrist fines, were levied at the corporate level and in some cases even tax deductible. This lack of justice is highlighted by the moral hazard and escalating immorality after 2008, as it failed to deter future systemic bank fraud. In the years following, we still witness systemic forex currency manipulation by no less than 15 banks, gold and silver manipulation, terrorist money laundering, and huge amounts of drug money laundering.
So we have HSBC, Europe's largest bank, is washing hundreds of millions of dollars for people who chop people's heads off with chainsaws. That's a crime. I mean, that's the worst crime that a bank can possibly commit. And anybody who thinks that Holder didn't send people to jail because they didn't commit crimes is not really paying attention to what went on during this time.
Furthermore, we witnessed tax evasion. Huge mis-selling scandals came to light in the UK with regards to payment protection insurance and interest rate swaps, as well as deliberate mistreatment of small businesses by taxpayer-owned banks. Back in the US, we witnessed the unauthorized raiding of sacrosanct segregated customer accounts with the collapse of MF Global.
To take customer money out of a 4D segregated account and transfer it to pay some other debt do not happen. That's a violation of the Act.
And even as late as 2016, Wells Fargo was caught carrying out fraudulent credit card issuance and account openings that had been going on for several years, whilst creaming off fees.
I am deeply sorry.
Sorry. With the exception of Iceland, the fact that barely a single bank executive has been criminally prosecuted over the last decade serves as a daily insult to every tax-paying, law-abiding person in the Western world. It's time to drain this financial swamp. It's time to take back control of our monetary system. It's time for justice and restitution. It's time for Bitcoin. In 2009, the world changed. The birth of Bitcoin brought with it not only facilitation of a competing currency, but also a competing monetary policy and financial platform completely out of the control of governments, the financial elite, and the legacy financial system. The significance of this simply cannot be understated. The entire world now has a competing monetary system that will hold fraudulent bankers and inept governments not acting in the best interests of the people, responsible and accountable for their actions. We are witnessing decentralization not only as a means of justice, but as a way to progress humanity as peak centralization fails due to systemic corruption. Bitcoin is like the all-seeing eye of Sauron, always on the lookout for fraud, corruption, injustice, and the destruction of fiat currencies, and wherever it sees it, it grows in strength. I see you. Unfortunately for governments and bankers, people now have a way to opt out of their system. As a result, the continuation of financial oppression is akin to self-harming as real-time justice is served via Bitcoin adoption. Thanks to Bitcoin, every time central bankers engage in financial engineering and debasement, that only benefits the top 0.1%, we get closer to ending their monopoly on currency issuance and clearance and returning to the free market. Thanks to Bitcoin, every time bankers engage in huge-scale fraud, it will chip away at their power and control and take us closer to the end of too big to fail and too big to jail. Thanks to Bitcoin, every time governments fail to uphold the rule of law, run massive deficits, implement capital controls and huge bank bailouts, we get ever closer to the separation of the state from finance, economics and our money. Thanks to Bitcoin, every time regulators and judiciaries fail to prosecute serial fraud and spend several years carrying out multi-million taxpayer-funded inquiries that go nowhere, Bitcoin will be there to provide instant justice. Bitcoin is like banker bashing 24/7 as it enforces real-time accountability and responsibility on the legacy system. But it doesn't stop there. Holding Bitcoin acts like real-time compensation for fraud, corruption, and central planning incompetence. Every single instance is like a snowflake accumulating on the side of a mountain, building up to an avalanche payday. In actual fact, when you own Bitcoin, outside of the effects it has on others, you simply don't care about the actions of governments and bankers because you benefit from all the fraud, corruption, and financial engineering due to increased Bitcoin adoption. Governments and central banks, you want to destroy fiat currencies?
Go ahead. Make my day.
Bankers, you want to commit more systemic fraud?
Go ahead. Make my day.
Establishment academics, you want to start a war on cash?
Go ahead. Make my day.
You want to continue long-term manipulation of precious metal prices?
Go ahead. Make my day.
Central banks, you want to artificially manipulate interest rates?
Make my day.
Mainstream media and politicians, you want to ignore unsustainable global debt?
Make my day.
And finally, you want to completely fail at regulating the financial system?
Go ahead. Make my day.
Whilst I don't condone any of the actions above, holding Bitcoin is a way to protect yourself and prosper as the old system rips itself apart under escalating immorality and debt. Gerald Celente was right. Justice is spelled wrong. It's now spelled Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't only justice for 2008 and post-2008. Bitcoin is an outright global monetary revolution in the face of brazen crony capitalism and state coercion established over decades. Andrew Jackson once said, if the people only understood the rank injustice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution by morning. 183 years later, we stand on the precipice. Whilst bankers live in emotional denial of Bitcoin's genesis in 2009, make no mistake, Bitcoin could turn bankers into washed-up Hollywood stars, outcompeted by the genius of the Bitcoin protocol.
Get out of the street, you fucking bum!
The financial renaissance is here, and it's time to clean up this town. No longer will the financial and political elite enjoy unaccountability and immunity for their actions.
Diplomatic immunity!
Because thanks to Bitcoin and the blockchain,
just been revoked.